guys, it's Courtney. I'm here with a video for Trinity Stamps. Today we are going to be using the Sweet Surprise stamp set as well as some embellishments here. These are some sprinkles with some little hearts in them and they look exactly like sprinkles. So we're going to be making a shaker card. So I'm starting off with my Missy here just because this is a huge image and I know I'm going to probably want to stamp it twice. I'm working with two different panels here, cut to the same size. They're both cut to an A2 size card. And this is Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock. I'm going to be stamping my image with Blackout ink by Ink on 3 because it is a Copic safe ink. So for my first panel, I am just going to stamp this once and put that aside. I'm leaving my stamp in the same exact spot, bringing out my second panel here and stamping the image again. This time I am going to stamp it twice because this will actually be my card panel, so I want to make sure that I'm getting a nice crisp image. Next, I'm going to bring out a piece of Simon Says stamp masking paper here, and I'm going to stamp this 3 times onto my masking paper. I will eventually need 3 different masks for this card. This image has some really thick lines, so it's super easy to cut out for masks or fussy cutting or anything like that. So I'm going to go ahead and fussy cut out all of my masks. And for now, I am just going to be using one of them, and I'm going to mask out that first image on my main panel. I'm going to go ahead and line up my stamp to the one side as if this little cupcake here, a big cupcake actually, is kind of behind the first one. Go ahead and stamp that twice again with that Blackout ink. And then I'm going to reposition my card panel here just so that it fits nicely and that it stamps nicely in my Misty, and stamp this again twice on the other side of my main cupcake or my front cupcake there. Next, I am going to go ahead and mask out these additional 2 cupcakes on my main panel, and we're just going to do a little bit of ink blending in the background just to add a little bit of color. I am going to be using 2 different colors of Distress Oxides. I am using Spun Sugar and Worn Lipstick. So like I said, I'm just going to add a little color. You can get fancy with this, but as you can see, I don't have a whole lot of space in blank space anyway because these images are so large. So I'm just going to add a little bit of the Spun Sugar towards the bottom of the card panel and then add the Worn Lipstick to the top portion of the card panel and kind of just get these 2 colors to blend a little bit. Honestly, if you don't get a perfect blend, you're not even going to know the difference because most of the panel is taken up by these cupcakes. So before I remove my masks, I want to make sure that my ink is a little bit dry because the Distress Oxides kind of sit on top of the paper. You want to make sure that they do have some drying time before removing your masks, especially if you're using masks as tacky as the Simon Says stamp, just because sometimes it can tear your paper as you're removing them. So I'm going to start off with this other panel here that's actually just going to mostly be hidden. The only part of this that I'm coloring is the actual frosting. So I am going to show you all of the coloring of this to kind of show you where I put my shading. As always, I am starting off with my lightest color just to map out my darkest areas and to get the paper saturated a little bit. So you can see that where the frosting is kind of indented in on either side, I'm bringing that out a little bit, kind of like a U shape or a V shape. Also on the bottom where it's a little bit of a curvy line, I'm adding a little bit of shading there too. The RV29 is my darkest color and you can see that it is pretty dark. And I don't want this to appear red, I want this to appear pink, so I'm using that very sparingly. Next is the RV25 and I'm just bringing that RV29 out just a little bit, including these little V lines or these, yeah, I guess they would be V's. I don't know, whatever you want to call them, but I'm just making them a little thicker and I'm extending them out a little bit further. Same thing with the RV23, just extending these areas out a little bit further. And you can see that I am leaving a pretty big highlight area, which I'm fine with. You're really not going to notice too much of the coloring for this particular cupcake because this is actually going to be the shaker portion of the card. So I'm going back in with that RV21 and just filling in the highlight area, which will pretty much be just in the center of the frosting. Next, I am going to bring out my main panel now that my Distress ink has had some time to dry, I'm going to carefully remove my masks. I typically use the corner of my scissors or the blade of my scissors just to kind of get that started so that I don't tear the paper, and then I'll just carefully remove the rest with my fingers. If my mask tears, I let it tear. I'd rather have the mask tear than the card itself. So we are going to color the frosting on these other two cupcakes here pretty much the same way as I did for the first. However, I'm going to move on to some cool gray markers. I want these to appear white, or vanilla frosting, I guess. So all I'm doing is adding my shading. I'm adding my shading to the same exact areas that I did for the pink one. I am starting right off with my darkest color because the grays blend so nicely. I don't feel the need to saturate the paper first. And also, now that I've already colored one, I pretty much know where my shading is going to be. Now this one is kind of laying behind that main cupcake or that middle cupcake. So I'm just kind of imagining that the rest of the lines are there. So you'll see here that I'm taking that C3 and I'm making that little V mark right there on the right hand side where this is laying behind that front cupcake, just as if those lines are still there. Once I have moved down to the C1 and you can see that I've left a lot of white space here, I'm going to quickly take my colorless blender and go over the entire thing just so that the C1 kind of blends in with the white area a little bit more and it's more of a seamless blend. I colored the one off to the right the same exact way, and for the cake portion itself, I'm going to move on to some E30 markers. I am going to just create a little bit of a shadow where the frosting would be laying over the cake part and a little bit of shading on either side. Because a cupcake is a round object, your highlight is going to remain in the center. I colored the other two the same exact way, again, just kind of imagining that the rest of the image I can see, but I colored them with the same color combination. For the cupcake wrappers, I'm going to move on to some R markers. I did want to bring some red to match the embellishments that I'm going to be using. Again, I'm going to concentrate my shading being on either side and keeping that center highlight. I also created just a little bit of a shadow where the actual cupcake or that cake portion of the cupcake kind of hangs over the wrapper a little bit. But again, leaving that highlight area for that R22, which is more of a pinkish color, but blends very nicely with the rest of the reds. Again, colored the other two the same exact way, and I wanted to ground these a little bit. So I want to add a little bit of a shadow underneath my cupcakes. So I'm bringing back out my C markers. Now keep in mind that coloring directly over distress oxides is not the best idea. So you can always use traditional distress inks for this instead. You're going to kind of get a muddy look, but I'm okay with that because it is a shadow and shadows kind of are a muddy look anyway. So I just wanted to kind of ground these a little bit. Now you can see that I don't have the best outline of my images because I didn't do the best job masking, and because the distress oxides are a little bit more opaque than most inks, they kind of cover up your outline. So I'm going to take an EK Success journaling pen, which is a Copic safe pen, and I'm just going to go over those lines. I would recommend using a water-based pen or a Copic safe pen to do this, just because if you use a Copic or an alcohol ink pen or marker, it may bleed. It may not, but I don't want to take the chance. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out the center of this main cupcake here. I'm just taking my craft knife here, which is extremely dull, and just kind of cutting out a triangle. And then I'll move in with my scissors, and I'm so sorry I forgot to zoom back out after I finished my coloring. So this might be make you a little dizzy, but I basically cut the main shape and then I'll go in and cut as close to the line or the black line as I could possibly get. In order to clean up those areas where I didn't do the best job, I am going to bring in my Copic. No, I'm not. I'm going to bring out, yes, my Copic, not my Copic safe pen because I don't have any coloring here, so I'm not too concerned. But I'm bringing out my black marker just to kind of fill in those little white lines that I have there from my horrible cutting job. So you can see once this is layered on top of that other panel, you can see the frosting coming through perfectly. So next we are going to go ahead and assemble our shaker. So I have a piece of acetate here and I'm using my Tombow Mono Multi Glue, which I use for everything, but you can use any adhesive here just to glue down my acetate on the back of my main card panel here. but you will want to give this a few extra minutes to dry. The Tombow Mono Multi Glue will dry permanent. However, it does take a few extra minutes when it's not paper to paper. So once I had that done and that had a few minutes to dry, I am going to go ahead and assemble everything. I lie. First, I forgot my sentiment. So before I assembled my shaker card, I wanted to make sure I stamped that down. This is from that same stamp set, and I'm just stamping with black dye ink by Simon Says Stamp directly under my little cupcakes there. So now we will go ahead and assemble the card. So I'm taking some foam tape here, and I'm pretty much covering up the entire back of this card panel, being careful not to go over that little opening that we had cut out there, but trying to get as close as I possibly can to it so my little shaker pieces don't fall out. I did remove the backing of the foam tape that's not anywhere near that opening first, just because it's kind of hard to remove once you have your shaker pieces in there. So if I can remove a few ahead of time, I typically do. So I'm going to take my sprinkles here and just sprinkle in a few in the little opening here. I'm not filling this all the way to the top because I don't want it to be all that bulky, and I want there to be enough room where these can shake around. I'm holding my card panel as tight as I possibly can while I remove the rest of the foam tape, because sometimes it gets stuck and your embellishments will go flying across the room and you'll be picking them up for the next 2 weeks. So I carefully removed the back of the foam tape here and then carefully laid down my other panel to the back of that foam tape, and you can see that lines up perfectly and you have all of your little shaker bits. I finished off the card just by adding a little bit of sparkle to these other 2 cupcakes with a Nouveau Aqua Shimmer pen, and that is it. That is the card for today, guys. Thank you guys so much for stopping by, and have a great day. Bye.